The wind whispered through the dark pines, their tall, thin silhouettes stretching like bony fingers against a bruised sky. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant croak of a raven. But there was something unnatural about the silence, a heaviness that pressed down on the landscape, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Lena had always been drawn to the woods. Growing up near the edge of the forest, she had wandered its dark pathways, familiar with its every turn. But tonight, the trees seemed darker, and the air felt colder, sharper. She had come into the forest after hearing a faint, distorted cry, like it had been stretched too thin over the wind. She stopped at a clearing she remembered from her childhood. The moonlight spilled down, casting long shadows that seemed to twist unnaturally. Lena set her pack down and pulled her jacket tighter around her. The cry had stopped, but something else lingered, a presence. She could feel eyes watching her from the darkness between the trees. She shouldn't have come, she knew that. But something had urged her on, pulling her deeper into the forest. As a child, she had heard the stories her grandmother told about the Wendigo, a creature born of hunger, neither man nor beast. It was said to dwell deep in the forest, where the wind howled like a cry of pain. She had never believed the stories, thinking them mere warnings to keep her from wandering too far. But now, those stories felt all too real. The Wendigo was said to be a spirit of greed, consuming anything it could find. It hunger eternally, twisting the minds of humans, feeding on their insatiable cravings. Lena glanced around again, but there was nothing. No movement, no sound. And yet, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Then, from the shadows, something shifted. Too fast, too fluid. A shape emerged, tall and unnaturally long, with pale, stretched skin over brittle bones. Its face, more masked than human, was twisted into a grotesque grin, hollow eyes staring back at her. The air grew colder, and the ground trembled beneath her feet. Lena froze, heart pounding, but she couldn't look away. The creature moved closer, each step slow and deliberate, as if savoring her fear. Its breath came in ragged bursts, fogging the air. She could feel it, hunger, deep inside her. Her thoughts became fuzzy, as though something was pulling at her mind. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The Wendigo's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, she saw something more than hunger, despair, ancient and endless. A voice whispered in her mind, "Run." It was her grandmother's voice. The Wendigo's movements were deliberate, its long arms reaching toward her. Lena stepped back, trying to resist the pull it had on her mind. The hunger inside her grew, insatiable. Then the wind howled, and the Wendigo growled, a deep, guttural sound that made the trees shake. Lena snapped out of her trance. She turned and ran. Branches scraped at her face, but she kept running, faster now, her chest tight with fear. The air was thick, suffocating. Behind her, the Wendigo's footsteps echoed, too fast, too close. She pushed herself harder, but the forest felt unfamiliar, as if it were shifting, turning. The trees twisted into impossible shapes, the shadows alive. The Wendigo was closer now, almost on top of her. Lena stumbled, falling to the ground. Her chest burned, and her breath came in ragged gasps. The Wendigo loomed above her, its face twisted in an eternal, empty hunger. She couldn't escape. And then she heard it again, her grandmother's voice. "The Wendigo can only devour you if you let it. It feeds on your hunger. But if you deny it, if you resist, it loses its power." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had forgotten those words. The Wendigo's mouth opened wide, an endless abyss of hunger. But she remembered now. The Wendigo's power came from desire, from longing. She could fight it. Lena stood, trembling but resolute. "You will not have me," she whispered. The Wendigo froze, its form flickering as if it were made of shadow. It let out a horrifying shriek and slowly began to fade into the darkness. The air grew still. Lena ran, no longer caring about the path or the trees. She ran with everything she had, driven by the will to survive. Her thoughts were clear now, the hunger inside her no longer controlling her. When she stumbled out of the forest and into the first light of dawn, the Wendigo was gone. The forest was silent. Lena knew one thing for sure. The Wendigo would always be there, waiting. But it could never devour her, not as long as she held onto the will to survive.